Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another webinar. Today, Callum and I are joined with Bruce from Evolve. We'll give people kind of a minute, sit down, maybe drink the last sip of their coffee or bite the sandwich. Just get people joining, and then we'll kick off. So I'll give it a minute from now.
Brilliant.
Bruce, that's an immaculate background. Is it virtual or physical?
I can swap the hats if you want. This is my TV room and my office.
It's great.
Yeah, you might have. Hopefully, obviously, this is live, so you might see my dog running in the background. Obviously, we run the Evolve podcast as well, Pipedrive podcast, and sometimes Betsy will just sit here and just yawn in the background. That usually happens when the sun in the afternoon, it just hits the back here. So it's funny that you're not the first person to say, "Oh, that's a really cool background. Where did you get that?"
Let's hope we're not making a yawn today.
No, that's it. I'm sure
it's a bit different from the sales team in your background walking past, Callum.
Yeah. See some.
Well, as long as they're in the office, that's they're not locked out again.
Yeah. For reference, for everyone watching, yesterday our power went off at Engage Tech. So if Callum suddenly freezes or drops out, you know exactly what's happened, and the nightmares happen again. But basically today we're going to talk through kind of like the importance of tracking your sales pipeline, putting together kind of rigorous processes to record activities the sales team are doing, the admin processes your sales team are doing, kind of all that qualitative and quantitative data, why we want to collect it, how to collect it. And also, it's probably fair to say that most admin task is at the bottom of every salesperson's to-do list. I know it's the end of our financial year, and our sales team are doing exactly what we want them to do, trying to close off deals. But our CRM probably hasn't seen much activity in the last kind of 2 days as people on the phone or email, and there'll be mass updates to help that. But yeah, so we're going to talk about maybe how we can ease that process and some pitfalls kind of people fall into. I'm certainly not an expert on the matter. In fact, as I just said, coming to the year end, I've been putting off a bunch of admin with these holidays as well, so it's mounted up. So I'm joined by two people who should basically be able to provide us with some tips, some tricks, point out some traps that salespeople and SDRs maybe fall into on a daily basis around this. First of all, as usual, joined by Callum, our Commercial Director, Engage IQ. Being Commercial Director, he's often faced with the unenviable task of seemingly trying to predict the future of the business. To do that, he's got to be backed up by data, and has certainly been on some rants for our salespeople and also been supported in other ways. So he's probably learned the hard way the importance of pipeline tracking and proper process. And should be able to point out some tricks. And also joined by Bruce, Director of Evolve. Evolve's a Pipedrive consultancy who's probably seen and helped teams nail this part of their workload. And on the flip side, has probably seen teams in dire straits with disparate systems and no clue where to start. And Bruce, I probably haven't done Evolve justice. Do you just want to give a bit of an intro into yourself, Evolve, and what you do at the company?
Yeah, brilliant. I appreciate it, Freddie. Thank you. And very much looking forward to this conversation, Callum. From my side, I'll just give you a little bit of intro into myself. So 15 plus years in sales across out-of-home industry, digital agencies, enterprise SEO, fintech, and now CRM. So I own and run Evolve. We are a technology consultancy that specialize in Pipedrive CRM. So we do implementation, consultancy around technologies that might integrate with Pipedrive, and we do training there as well. So very much looking forward to see what we can come up with today.
Nice one, cheers. And Callum, maybe we've got some new viewers. Do you just want to give a bit of a background on Engage IQ and your role as well?
Sure. Engage IQ is part of a wider company called Engage Tech. We live and breathe outbound prospecting and support companies in the B2B tech sector. We provide a service where you can essentially hire an SDR from our business who will essentially deliver a number of appointments for you on a quarterly basis. Engage IQ is an enablement tool where if you've got a team of your own, you can plug that team in and essentially point them at the right prospects at the right time, improve their data connect, and ultimately both of those services result in accelerating your speed to market and more pipeline for your sales team. And my roles, I carry the revenue number for both parts of the company, and I think I've said it many times. Ultimately, I just try and make us 1% better every day, and whatever that entails, I do.
Brilliant. Very, very, very vague around the role, but as I said, like massive part of your role is obviously trying to kind of like predict that future of the business, and also kind of like look at the data that our sales team is putting out. Just realised we've got some overlap on the when we've gone live. The percentages are kind of moved down.
It doesn't show that on mine, but we can share it afterwards if needed.
Yeah, exactly. No worries. Basically, kind of the aim of today is to talk about, well, I suppose the 47% to the other side of this stat of the fact that 53% of salespeople salespeople spend 53% of their day on selling activities. Talk about that kind of like other 47%. What does that mean? How can we move it? Obviously, a lot of sales leaders want to see that number increased. It would be great if it meant that salespeople were selling 100% of the time with maximum efficiency and everything else automated. That's often not the case, and there's a lot of people with nothing automated. There's some great work in the market, and Bruce has been a part to kind of automate as much as possible. But the majority of people fall in the middle, where there's still quite a lot of admin tasks to be doing. Before we dive into kind of what that other 47% is, it's probably worth defining what the 53% is. So kind of selling activities is very vague. I suppose back in the day, it would have been people out on the road visiting offices or on the phone. But now, in kind of a digital era, it seems a lot more vague. Bruce, have you got an insight into maybe how you've used this stat and what you define it to some of your customers in the past?
Yeah, the first word that I picked out on this page was selling, right? So, and if we're looking at the how you're spending your workday there, and if we're going to talk about the activities, so what are sales activities? What if we're going to define them? We might look at being on the phone. If you think of channels, right? So it might be on the phone, it might be in a meeting, it might be sending emails, texting, meeting on site, going to events. So I'd look to define, actually what those channels are, and then in terms of insights into what that might look like across our types of customers, we typically find that a lot of salespeople can either hide behind emails, so that they could be sending a hell of a lot of emails and then say, yes, we're selling here. Some of the better performers typically are booking more meetings. We know that, right? And if they're underperforming, that's where they might use your service to actually have get those meetings booked. But yeah, for me, I got stuck on the what are they actually doing for that 53% of the time, and then as a business, what else are they doing? Are they training? Are they is that in training? Is that in building a proposal? So like the non-revenue activities. So it depends how you're defining selling, right? Being on podcasts, that those are non-revenue generating activities, but they might be helping the business. So.
Sure. Callum, you're probably closing in on 7 years managing sales teams or SDR teams. Suppose you might have a clear idea as to what you want that 53% to be. And it might be worth discussing whether what you want that 53% to be is actually the same as what it is as well. So yeah, what would you view those activities as?
Yeah, so if I look at our account managers comparatively to our new business team, I think it's pretty reasonable that this is a stat on an average basis that makes sense. Our account managers are probably on calls with their customers for maybe 6 out of the 8 hours in a day. But I don't imagine that many sales development reps or new business people in a company that doesn't have a really established marketing funnel are spending 53% of their time on the phone to a prospect or on a scheduled call, having conversations with potential customers. And so I think selling can be broken down even further, not just like to the channel, but also what role are you doing? Are you retaining business, or are you actually trying to acquire a new customer? The biggest challenge I see for sales development reps seems to be talk time and connections. And I've said it on a few of the other parts of this series. It seems like a 20-to-1 data connect is the industry average at the moment, and that's a hell of a lot of the day on voicemails with the phone ringing. And so, yeah, I think it's maybe even the outlook is even worse, maybe than the 53% suggests for particular roles.
Yeah, and there's I heard a long time ago that the difference between a good salesperson and a bad salesperson is a bad salesperson gets told no 9 times out of 10. A good salesperson gets told no 7 times out of 10. So you're being told no more times than not, right? So and to that point, it's either being told no and or having that activity where it's voicemails. You're not actually getting through to anybody. So
sure. And so we know we've kind of defined that 53%. If we look at the 47, are we defining that as like inefficiency here for the sake of this, or are there tasks we wouldn't want this to say 100% is spent selling? Because I imagine there's tasks or self-promotion that goes into every type of role that you don't want people on the phone with customers 24/7.
So we started off with, you said it's your end of year, right? Or end of the quarter, end of the year. So are they selling or are they putting the data into there? So that might go up now, or are they tracking their activities in their CRM? What's more important to the business? So probably getting on the phone with the people that have registered interest, proposals have been sent, making sure that there's following up there. So that might ramp up in those kind of high pressure moments, end of the month, end of the quarter, certainly end of the year. But yeah, it's just how you're defining what is selling here, right? And how you're defining those activities for me.
In answer to your question, Freddie, I definitely wouldn't want the new business team that I work with, as an example, to be at the 100% end. I don't believe that gives them an opportunity to prepare for calls. I don't believe it gives them an opportunity to truly make the experience bespoke and relevant for prospects that they're engaging with. If you think about a customer interaction as, I kind of view that in the sports sense, that's like game day, right? And if you're only ever at game day and you're not spending any time listening back to those calls or in an environment where you're actually learning from what happened last time out.
Yeah,
100%. And I think
do you guys do that internally? Do you set aside time to say what worked well that week, what worked well that month, what worked well this year, and say, cool, how do we might touch upon this later in terms of culture, but is that an intentional thing that you guys would do?
Absolutely. So one of the interesting elements of this conversation is that the CRM for a lot of companies seems to hold a lot of information, very valuable information. We are very heavy Slack users. And so I would say a lot of the information that would, for most other companies, sit in their CRM actually sits within Slack. And the reason why I went down that route to answer your question is every one of our SDRs who represents one of our customers and does the outsource part that I described earlier, at the end of every day, they do an update in that channel, which is purely reflection focused. What happened today? What were the conversations that I had? If I could have my time again, what would I do slightly differently? What did I kind of learn from today? And so at an SDR level, that's happening regularly. And then we also are heavy Refract users in our business, and there are call review sessions and peer-to-peer coaching happening for our new business teams and account management teams on a weekly basis, where we'll pull up a call. This is what happened.
They've got some quite good sentiment analysis, right? So who's listening, who's asking questions and things. Is that right?
A large part of that can be automated for you. We're not necessarily in those coaching sessions relying entirely on that. It's peer feedback. But yeah, I mean, I think they're hugely valuable sessions, and probably an element that I think would be key for any company if they were going to do things like that. I think you need the CRM up as you're doing it. Like, what was the write-up for this conversation from the salesperson, and how accurately does that actually reflect what people thought as peers when they were watching it? And I may be of the view that salespeople are always their most optimistic when they update their CRM notes, when they should probably be their most pessimistic.
Okay, okay, that's good. What do you? Okay, so why do you say that, and And yeah, why do you say that? I like that.
Probably because the majority of them that I've ever seen always make it seem like a deal's going to be closed, but actually in reality that doesn't end up happening.
So it's that kind of I'm going to use an analogy of like, I think she likes me, but does she really, or is she just being polite or nice, right? So but then that comes down to the metrics of how you judge a call. So did they actually give you any indication of are they committing to send you something? So actually, are you actually moving anything forward? So that's a really interesting point about being the most optimistic when you're putting things in. Yeah,
but I think that pulls up, Callum, was you're talking there, like quite an interesting situation that I think a lot of companies are in at the moment, where we've just mentioned 4 straight off the rip. We use Salesforce as our CRM, but on top of that, we've got other systems like SalesLoft. So immediately we've got 4 systems there: Slack, Refract, Salesforce, and SalesLoft, that probably all hold different sentiment to how a single conversation has gone. Salesforce, really, really optimistic. Deal's going to close in 10 days. Refract, probably a true reflection of the conversation, because it is actually the conversation, but it's in like an audio format. SalesLoft, only ever one way, only ever outreach, and then Slack, reflections on it. How in this modern day and age do we draw that into like one, almost like brain, one like area that is useful? Bruce, is probably a question for you. Is something you might come up again a lot with people trying to move information into Pipedrive. Is that the aim, or actually in this day and age is that kind of impossible?
So in the ideal world, right, you live in one system, for a department, really, because you don't want different departments really touching different things. So in the ideal world, you have that one system that might, so you're calling from your CRM that's automatically recording your calls, is automatically doing your sentiment analysis, and you can log your notes against it, and then you call and you on to the next call, next prospect, or your next meeting, whatever else, and all your activity in one place. And that's kind of, we actually use Pipedrive for that very reason, because it tracks activity. It's an activity based system, so that's kind of, you should be living in your CRM there, and obviously it can connect to all these other systems. But there are other systems like SalesLoft or Gong.io. There are loads of kind of sales enablement tools, right? So I think the ideal world, yes, you'd love to have it in one, but then you might have a platform like Engage IQ, which is kind of, you think of that as your prospecting platform, right? So how I would like to view that, and I know we don't have the integration just yet, but I would like to view that as the CRM is your hub of where all the information is that's valuable to your business. Where do I want to now place that? Cool, I've got this data. I'm going to put it into my prospecting platform and prospect through them through Engage IQ there. And then any engagement, so yes, you're prospecting, which is basically a marketing channel, because you're kind of a marketing qualified turning into sales qualified. As soon as they engage, that might go to your AEs, and later on in your it turns into, in Pipedrive language, a deal, Salesforce language, an opportunity. So then you've got something to close, right? So then you've got something to close in that CRM. But from having that one source where everything comes back to, that's the ideal. But right now we do have best in class systems all over the place, and I think we're quite new in the MarTech has grown over the last decade. Sales tech's kind of growing up in the last 3 years or so, and it's only going to start seeing these integrations. So, which is why you guys have a integrations team that's got set up. I think it was last November time. This is super important. Like, you can't just have these data silos or platform silos in one place. That's because people are using multiple applications currently. How can we either natively have them integrate, no code have them integrate, or give them access to kind of have scripting between the two systems? Because at the end of the day, having the perfect system in multiple places for certain users to use it is one thing, but actually it's what can the whole team use. Like the user adoption is huge here, right? So it's not about having the perfect system that no one uses. It's about having the system that actually that the managers use, that the individuals use. So that's what I'll probably say on that.
And this is obviously quite a big cost for a business to kind of, and it affects, let's say, in a sales team of like 10 people, that kind of like sales lead the most. They suddenly realize, oh, we've got all these disparate systems that don't talk to each other. The actual salespeople might be quite happy. They might be closing deals, but there's just no kind of like eyes on that. This isn't kind of like a small task in terms of like moving that data across. I imagine in your business, the fact you come in and consult on this, you've got to provide kind of like ROI back to sales leaders on the importance of knitting all these together. So how do you do that?
Yeah, it's quite funny. If you as I'm sales director of the company, right? So a lot of the business is we've got sales and marketing, and then it's all consultants that do a lot of the work, the delivery and the implementation and consulting. I've stopped trying to sell to a sales manager or sales director because I talk to business owners in this kind of world that I'm living in now, mainly because, to your point there, a sales manager might not have the impetus. What they're currently doing is fine. They're meeting their targets. They spend all day Friday pulling the reports together, but it's actually taking them a whole day to collect Jenny, Jason, Sarah's, all of those activities from a spreadsheet, from their system. But it works for him. He's effective in what he's doing, but he's not necessarily efficient. So you could be saving time. I think that, I don't know if that answers your question, but about the sales manager or sales director being effective in what they're currently doing, but having no real impetus to change, that they've got no reason to change. Whereas if you talk to maybe a business owner, that they would have and they're invested to actually, they want to hit these growth goals. And there's someone I'm thinking of right now. You've grown from 1 million to 8 million pounds. That's a success, right? Over the last 2 years. But actually the business has growth goals to hit 20 million. You can't continue doing what got you from 1 to 8 with creaky processes or slow follow-ups or proposals taking too long to fill out if you don't make some investment now to then be more efficient, not necessarily just effective.
Sure, and so what you're saying is, like, I suppose you take our situation at the moment. We've got like X many salespeople. We're 120 person business, so still quite a small business. One salesperson can almost kind of like reach across and just ask Callum, or Callum can go, "Oh, what did you mean by this?" And Callum talks about sales notes being different from in Refract. How important is it to get it right early on? Because for businesses our size, like Engage Tech, it might be like, oh, this is quite a big cost for us. And at the moment, Callum can reach across and talk to a salesperson. Let's tackle this when we're like a 200 person business or a 300 person business. Is it more complicated the larger the business is to like knit these systems together?
Is that for me or for Callum?
Well,
because I would say the moving parts, the departments, that's when it gets tough, right? So if it's within one department, the scale isn't quite. So what's the difference between 120 people to 200 people if it's all in one department? So if you've got the management levels at the right and they've got their accountability levels correct in terms of what their ownership is against their kind of subgroups, their individual team members. For me, it's actually the departments, and when you kind of have to talk to different. So you might have SDRs when they hand over to an AE. How's that handled? When that's handled to the account management team, how's that handled? That's for me the more complexities where you might want to invest in having it in one system, or certainly a workflow where you know what the baton handing over looks like. What information has to come from this stage to the next. That's probably the more important question versus the size of a team, I think.
Callum, that kind of baton handing over certainly feels like a kind of beast you've been wrestling with with in the recent past, that kind of like marketing, SDR, AE, CSM, account manager. Like there's a lot of information to pass on there. I suppose, yeah. What are the problems you've seen cropping up with that, and maybe some of the solutions that we've tried to come up with to rectify them?
10 seconds on the previous question that you asked, Bruce. I think from my side, it's just the fact that we've used the same CRM since we were in existence. Whenever we've done outbound prospecting for CRMs, they are slower moving campaigns where the kind of run rate that you can hit is smaller. And I think that's just an indication of the fact that generally, once a company has settled in their early years on a system, it's an upheaval to change it. And that would be an indicator that sooner than later is probably how most companies would look at it. I don't think I'm qualified to answer it from a sat within a business perspective, but certainly our experience of talking to other companies about it is that way. Go on, Bruce.
No, I'll just taking a deep breath.
I think the first part of the workflow that you were talking about there, Freddie, is almost just like a glossary of terms. So often we've been in meetings where there are people using things like leads or opportunities or contacts, and there can sometimes be just a bit of ambiguity around what something means. And yeah, you could have vastly different conversations with people. And I think so it's just setting what actually, when we use this word, does this mean? And
I think you said leads and opportunities, and everyone trips up on it. It's what do you mean there? Yeah.
Well, an opportunity for us isn't a stage in our sales process or on the buying process, but it's something that gets spoken about a lot because it's what it's called in the CRM, and it's
in Salesforce.
And so you can quickly get lost. Someone said, "Well, this is an opportunity." It was like, okay, but what is the actual stage that is at then? And perhaps the SDR and the account exec are slightly misaligned on it. And so the first thing is just common language and having that kind of predetermined glossary. The next stage, I think, is having really well-defined stages in any given process and expectations about what needs to be input into the CRM to move it through those stages. And certainly something that we've lent on in more recent times, Freddie, which has been a little bit of upfront work, but once it's in motion is quite seamless. It's just having rules. These are compulsory fields, or these are things that you can't progress to without certain information filled in. And I think there's an element of keeping the team honest by including automated parts of it. That I think would be my advice. So those would be the two things: some element of automation and making sure that there's kind of common phrases used. Has helped for us to see a kind of transition from different teams across the process.
You use the phrase there, just like keeping the person honest. Keep them, maybe you said on their toes, but don't put words in your mouth. When you're passing it,
I said honest.
Honest. Nice. When you're passing it from like person to person, do you find that kind of like honesty fall, or do you find that honesty like go up? Because I can kind of see two situations here. One where it's like, oh, I'm passing it across, so like I've done my job, here it is, the AE. But then also there's the Christ, I don't want to be like all this bad admin that I have been doing for the last 3 months, or like maybe not bad, just I haven't done it. It's suddenly being like, I've got to pass this across, so it's going to be like really rigorously filled out. Do you find them falling into one or two of those camps, or do you think one more than the other? Or
when you were talking about that, the first thing that kind of came into my mind was the kind of CS quote that 90% of customers are lost at the point of sale, which is that like new business person transitioning to a retention person, and there just being a complete miscommunication at that point. And I don't believe that there is often, or at least in experience in our company, a malicious intent there. It is a lack of real understanding about what is the information that is going to help someone who's not been in any way involved in this process so far to hit the ground running and give the customer the best possible experience. And that is a human-to-human communication fault alongside a systems fault. And if you set up your systems right to mean that information is captured across the sale, even if the human-to-human part fails, it's documented. And my general experience is that it's probably both elements there that is failing. That means that customers are lost at the point of sale.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose you say kind of like, is the systems to stop that kind of like human to interaction, because I feel like you're never going to get that 100% down. How do you set up the systems? And Bruce, is this something that you've done before? It's almost like the psychology of it, isn't it? To like, what is the information that's not just pertinent to get this sale across the line, but the CS person doesn't want death by information. Like, we don't want this kind of like four systems and got to go through and see everything else. They probably do want to be able to catch up pretty fast. That seems very like psychological, cultural, rather than like this is like the right way to do it. Do you come up against kind of pushback from people on that element, or?
Yeah, I was just thinking it's more of the cultural fit and what. So when we say CSA, we mean customer success, right? So why do people end up being in customer success teams or account management teams? There are a number of routes there, right? But sometimes it's more relationships. So they value relationships more deeper, and they don't like selling because they think it's a dirty word. So I'm just going to let's capture that point. And there's another point here is if you're saying that 90% of sales are lost at the point of sale, there's a something I heard kind of in the agency world where you might have your A team turn up to deliver the pitch, but then the B team turn up to deliver the work. And that's a real contrast between you have, the head guys win it. That's a wow. And then you have the B team show up and kind of doing the work there. Now, the reason I want to bring those two together is there might be a mix of those two things happening, right? Because your sales guys are fantastic. They know it. They're energetic, cool, and they knock it out of the park. And it hands over to the CS, and and there's this real disconnect between the energies and when the rubber hits the road in terms of delivering the project and or onboarding them. It just isn't. It's not quite there. On the piece about the account management side and the psychology piece, if the sales lost, it might. So what data can be put across here? So the why now, what actually have they signed up to do? What are their intentions over the next 6 to 12 to 2 years? If you don't know that and pass it on to the CS team or the account management team, their upselling ability will be dampened because the mindset is sometimes a little bit different in CS teams because they don't want to sell or seem to be selling. But actually, if you know that they've got this company has a growth goal to hit X, Y, or Z, those are investments. You're not selling to them because it's taking money out of their pocket. You're actually helping them to achieve their goals. So I use the agency analogy there. If they spend an extra £10,000 a month with the agency on their ad spend, and £20,000 on ad spend, that's not a bad thing because that brings them, the company, £200,000 worth of revenue. So it's the investment piece from the kind of customer success side. So if you don't, so what data can come across? Why did they sign up? What their kind of ambitions and goals for using your system, your service, and then if that can come across, that hopefully can aid the CS team there.
And Callum, we've talked about Bruce, you just talked to us about kind of like the actual fields and what aids there. Callum, is there process that kind of like surrounds that, or is it just between the AE and the CS person? Do you pull like other people into that change of information? The reason is one job title that's kind of sprung up recently, maybe in the last kind of like 5 years, is the emergence of like completely specified sales ops role. It's this one person who's specified in like, I need to make sure that sales are focused on selling, and I'll do all the kind of background work to help that. Do you find in those handover processes having like a mediator there helps? And is that the sales ops role, or is there someone else there? How's that works? What do you think? Yeah.
Well, I mean, something that's emerged for us in the recent past has been on the SaaS side of our business. We have a dedicated onboarding team now, and I can only really see that potentially growing and may even spill over into the services part of our business over the next kind of 12 to 18 months. And I think if there's a dedicated role to do that, I think it's maybe more that than sales ops. Yeah, I believe we were talking earlier a little bit about enablement of tools when you buy something new, and yeah, that onboarding experience is so important. But again, like I think when you talk here about revenue loss, I think my gut instinct when I look at this slide is to think about lost sales from a new business perspective. But actually, there's a significant amount of revenue loss that could come into play if you don't effectively hand over from an account exec to a CS or onboarding person, and then to the account manager as you go through. There could have been some amazing information that the AE qualified in the original sales process that if the account manager knew that info, they'd be well placed to upsell. And we've seen a significant trend in our business over the last couple of years, potentially COVID related, of us doing a much better job of getting our existing customers to spend more comparatively to missing our new business goals. I mean, still winning new logos, but maybe not in the way that we thought that we would. Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes back to this process, definitely having a dedicated individuals involved is useful. But I think the topic here really revolves around the capture of information to mean that everyone is enabled in the best possible way to provide the best service to a customer. And getting the systems right underpins a fail-safe that if one person leaves or if the handover wasn't amazing, you've always got like a truth to go back to. Interestingly for us, that's probably more likely Slack than Salesforce. I don't know if that's right or wrong. Maybe goes a little bit against what Bruce was saying earlier about having a single system. But
so there is no right or wrong, right? There is what's currently being used. There is the as-is process and what you want to be. We always start with forget the technology. Like remove the tech, because everyone's either got ideas, they've done their own research, they spoke about tech, remove the tech. What is it that you're currently doing as a business? And then how would you like it to be? Could that be on one system or whatever else? Most of the time it can't be on just one. That's the ideal, right? But there isn't just one system that does all that. But I just wanted to kind of touch upon the if you are going to have these systems and to track your sales process and pipeline, there's a couple of things, right? So what's the importance of tracking and optimizing your deal conversion, and why is that important? So, and having a system to do that, tracking and monitoring your activity types. I think we may have touched upon this around this more to do with the previous slide, but I just had some thoughts about it. Tracking and monitoring activity types, because you might find that the activities of your lowest performing salespeople don't measure up with the guys at the team at the top. So, and why is that? So you might find that the lowest performing salespeople, the activities are more 80% on emails versus they're not having enough meetings booked, or they're not having enough calls in the diary. You might want to find out what you have there: wasted sales rep time, trust in your forecasting activity, right? So working out the reasons why you're losing deals. If you're tracking that in a CRM, or at least tracking it somewhere, so then you can come back to it at the end of the month, end of the quarter, end of the year, and say, why do we lose these deals? Is there a new competitor in the market? Are we being outpriced? Is our pitch right? Is our offering right? I heard the other day, if Coca-Cola was to sell themselves like a B2B sales company, they would say, we've got the fizziest drink, the most amount of calorie, or the least amount of calories. There'll be feature. But that's not how people buy. They buy emotionally. So Coca-Cola actually put the kind of how it makes you feel across versus put in the features there. And then also if you're using the track forecast and activities, if you are tracking this, you can then identify where the inefficiencies in your process is. So are you spending too much time on proposals? Are you spending too long on the calls? So when Callum, you mentioned earlier about that when you do your refract calls, you might identify that some of the people that are on the cusp of really on the cusp of getting into that kind of top 5% bracket, they might be spending too long on the call. But they may have been able to just hang up. Like they've got the information they need. We understand meetings next, but you're going to send me this. Wrap up, so and just having better kind of meeting etiquette, so always having agendas and whatever else. But yeah, I thought I'd say those bits before we moved on to the technology and culture piece, because that's where the technology can come in, right? So if you're tracking those activities, monitoring those the conversion bits, that then allows you as a business to make those better decisions later on.
Sure, and I suppose that kind of like ties into the kind of like technology and culture bit, as you say, and like the data is going to say like one thing, like how reliant are businesses on data? Like I kind of feel like there's two or maybe like three camps where people are literally like, if the data says it, we're doing it. People who obviously have no data, they can't make a decision. Then in the middle ground, there's maybe like not enough faith to make the jump, or also they might be like, no, there's huge like qualitative elements that we're kind of like forgetting about here. Or is technology so good these days that we can probably trust it, maybe implicitly?
No, because it's shit in, shit out. Sorry. If it's not being collected, or if it's being collected in really, really rich way on Slack, as an example, no one else in the business can see that. So it's technology. There is no utopian technology out there right now. We always say automate in, manual out, and that's kind of similar for your internal processes. Like you shouldn't just be automating everything. You want to kind of there should be some room for your individuality that's come out and come through there. So
you use quite an interesting. Go on, Callum.
I was going to move on to the culture point, so you go.
No, I was just going to say, you use quite an interesting phrase that maybe it's just worth like diving into. You said like shit in, shit out. What is the like? Is shit in worse than nothing in? Like in your expertise,
can be.
And do you just like when you're like consulting on this, be like, okay, let's cut down these data points and just get like quality in these X areas? Is that something that you come up against, or?
Yeah, I mean, you'll be surprised that when you look inside someone's business and how they're collecting things. Again, there is no right or wrong way, because a lot of these businesses have been running for 10, 20, 30 years. Some of them are fresh as well, right? But talking to a business that's got £10 million in the pipeline that they, for the next quarter, that they run through on an Excel sheet line by line. They're like, oh, where's this £900 order? £900,000 PO's gone out. And they say, Charlie, have you chased this up? Oh no, I don't really want to chase them up. It'd be a bit too pushy. Have they even opened it? Did they receive it? What's the feedback? That's where technology can allow you to have better conversations, because if that's already tracked and they've opened it 7 times or whatever else, versus pure guesswork, those meetings, I mean, we've all sat in them for the last decade or so. Like we've all been through those kind of line by line sales meetings. That doesn't have to be the way, and that doesn't have to be the case anymore. Technology can help there, so you can have a better conversation in that 20-minute window versus an hour, where you got a defensive salesperson that's trying to say, "Oh, I don't. What are you talking about? This is fine," or whatever else. So you can have better conversation because of technology there.
Sure. So technology's got a huge part to play. But Callum, you mentioned you were going to kind of talk about the cultural element of this as well.
Yeah, a point that Bruce made earlier about like reviewing your closed loss deals just kind of triggered a thought process in me that there's an interesting book called Shift, which I'd recommend anyone in kind of sales leadership to read. And it essentially just talks about the fact that really there are a number of triggers when you're selling that you can use to your advantage. Just a simple thing: if you see someone moves company, it's highly likely that they're going to be replaced by someone. And also there's a little bit of a merry-go-round, like who is the person who's initially moving, replacing? And if you follow the train of it, you might find 6 to 8 different people who've all started in a new role. And it's highly likely. Yeah. All of these are people that might be requesting money or funding, or they might be sponsored for tool acquisition in their new role. Regardless, one of the points in the book is that actually you're much better off looking at your won sales than your closed lost sales to review, to actually find out where there are particular triggers that are potentially very valuable for you moving forward. An example of a trigger for our business is if someone compliments our initial outreach and appreciates the quality of that outreach, the likelihood of them purchasing from us in future is significantly more. AKA, we are kind of showing them that we are good at what we're going to be trying to sell them at some point. And one of the most interesting things about doing that activity with the sales team was it actually took quite a lot of questioning when we did the exercise to get the person that had made the original sale to identify why the person bought and what about our approach made them buy. It wasn't immediately obvious. And I don't necessarily believe that most CRMs are set up to answer these kinds of questions. They are perhaps some more functional information, what's happening in a company, what's the deal size, sales cycle, like status right now. But they're actually quite often almost like a layer 2 set of questions that can be really insightful for a sales organization that maybe wouldn't immediately be captured. And the reason why I think it comes under culture rather than technology is you need to have an ability or a mechanism to talk as a team and collaborate and share to establish what are these common patterns that wouldn't necessarily have immediately been put in the CRM.
So do you have, because that's a really nice point about looking at your close one and why, and kind of going back there. I mean, I've done some consulting for some other businesses, and the easiest way to find clients is anyone that's spent money with you before, that they're the most likely people to spend money with you again, versus trying to find new clients there. And that's just kind of on the kind of helping my brother-in-law out with his what does he do? Car. He's basically a mechanic, basically. Anyway, so it's a complete, very kind of grounding business. But I completely lost my chain of thought there.
Whilst you get it back, I think I'm always putting our ex-customers in our prospecting channel, saying, have we got back in touch with this company? Because I think as the SDR, they've got the toughest job in that, which is to get through the initial objections of, we've used you before. But once you can handle it, like a couple of those objections at the start, I think that you've made a very good point, which is the likelihood of that company spending with you again compared to a company that's never spent with you before it's just non-comparable. Sorry.
So I remember what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
So
I thought you would.
that culture piece and the going back. So what you said there about the person with that book shift and the insight to ask someone that has closed with you before. Is that a culture, technology, or is there another piece with like a process? And where does process sit in here? And how do you because otherwise you've got one guy, you got a couple of people that have got the gift of the gab and they know the right questions to ask natively, right? Or do you, as a sales leader, sales director, do you script those questions that they must answer so how do you approach that?
I think on this particular point, on our ex-customers, where I would want technology to support is to essentially populate a list to say, here are the 5 companies that it has been a year since they spent with us.
Yeah.
And I would like for that to appear somewhere where the team that would be responsible for calling them can see it. And then the culture aspect of that, from my perspective, would be to help for people to feel like making that call is something that's of value, and that they don't need to necessarily be concerned if there's a couple of initial objections, and to support them in believing that there is a good method for re-engaging them. And I think that's very much down the culture end. That would be how I would personally look for that to be balance between these 2 points.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment, the process is: do I remember to have a look and then pull a list and then share it with them?
Yeah, I
Which
mean,
is-
you
which is not
could
sustainable in a
have
in a large
auto
business.
activities that 11 months later, and then again, if the sales team are living in a system where what do you log in daily to? How are you managing your day as an individual? Like, what's your activity list? Where does it live? Are you just is it only your prospecting list? Is it who? Because your prospecting list could be cold. Is it hit list, hot list, kill list, or whatever whatever you want to call it, right? How do you split that time up? Yeah, so there's loads of we could keep going on that for sure, but
Sorry, that change of slide wasn't a cut
Oh,
of the
sorry.
conversation. That was like,
It's so
I've
small,
got to
I can
juggle
hardly see it on my
my. Yeah, I've got to juggle the slides and the webinar software, so I've got to toggle between them when I'm not speaking. But I suppose as we're speaking, like to wrap up, like what is the impact of getting this all right? Callum, you talked about putting messages in the SDR channel, and I suppose having worked at Engage Tech for so long, it's a lot of it is kind of like your hive mind of understanding of like our customer base and the ability to just pull a list and get it, pull a list of X customers might be quite difficult. But I suppose the upside of getting it right and investing that time now could be 2x return in the future. I suppose question to you, Bruce, like this is a slide you probably have to present to prospective customers when they're interested in your services. What are your kind of like 3 things you're normally putting here or the customers want to see?
So I think it's actually we can't. So where we sit, right? So the piece, if you're we can't promise outcomes, right? So as a consultant, that is taking someone from a spreadsheet to X, and where we don't have we actually want to make sure they're set up, trained, and they can take ownership and use it themselves. So it's actually very hard for us to say, cool, the ROI on this is going to be X. This is not our software. We are consulting on Pipedrive software and Aircool and whatever software that's plugging in. We're going to help them make the best decision for them as a business. Like, so that's why we say remove the tech. What we're very good at is identifying the pain. Like, if they don't do this, and so why now? Why did they reach out? Why now? What's led them to do? Oh, they're either chasing growth goals or they're trying to systematize the business and find efficiencies, right? So those are kind of the 2 channels why people are inspired to change. Cool. Can we identify 3 pains? And we basically create a pain matrix. What's the pain? What's the impact on the business? Solution, deliver, and then the deliverable output. So we kind of have this kind of pain matrix. So actually, Callum, you mentioned how can you capture this throughout your sales process? So we create a document after a positive intro call. I would create a PID, which is kind of auto-generated. It's that captures my intro call questions that I've brought up. So why now? Basically, like the BANT methodology piece, which is that it should be what we use in that first kind of 15 to 20 minutes. Have they got budget? And are they going to close in the next quarter, whatever else? And then we use Medic after that to try and flesh out the sales story as like a identifying the pain, who's a champion, inspiring change, or whatever else, or identifying the pain, not inspiring change. Inspiring change is actually what I define sales as. I don't want to. That might be that they choose us, or they choose someone else. I just want them to make it. If I think our solution, our product, our service that I'm working, the industry that I'm working in, if I want them to know that they've got a problem, they need to do something about it. So I've always thought it as inspiring change, whether that's you choose me or you don't, but that's on you. But I want to give enough value that they then come back to me, and then obviously they do choose us. But that's a long tangential way of saying getting all this right. I think long-term effects. It can enable growth, and in terms of scaling, it can enable you to redirect your investments. So whether that's in marketing, when do you hire a new SDR? When are things going right? Do you need to hire more customer service people? At what time do you do that? So I would say the impact of getting all this right can be pretty. It would be massive for any business. But.
Yeah, and all that data kind of leads back to that kind of predictability that is so important. You mentioned when to hire the new SDR, when to hire the new customer success person, when to hire the next salesperson. That's only going to streamline your growth. I know Lemkin, for example, talks on LinkedIn about the worst that your business can do is hire too late quite a lot of the time. And it's this kind of data insight that is going to be able to go, okay, we might not have this pain now, but we know a hiring process takes 4 months. We're going to have this pain in 4 months' time. You're not going to know that without the data. Yeah.
My input on this question, like the impact of getting it all right, is to maybe just look at the question slightly differently, which is, I don't think getting it right is it's not like a one-time thing.
It's not like a destination.
Congratulations. It's an ongoing thing. Like the culture within the team will change as people move into different roles or you hire new people, and the systems that you use. I remember 3 or 4 years ago we didn't even use Slack. Now it's like basically I can't imagine the company without it. It's just to know that I think you put it right there, Bruce. It's not a destination. It's almost like a constant effort to make sure that you're in as close to an optimal state. Which is why things like sales ops have emerged as a really important role in companies. So, don't view it as a destination would be my point on this.
Yeah, and the more data you have, the more high fidelity you can, more accurate your decisions can be, right? So otherwise it's going to be a low fire. If you've only got one data point a year, which is total revenue. If that's your only data point, then you can't make very good decisions on that.
Perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully we haven't painted too much of like a mountain for some people to climb, and I imagine a lot of people as well might leave feeling more confident and with maybe a bit of a spotlight on where to go next. Thanks Bruce for joining us, and thanks Callum for jumping on as always.
Cheers, gents. See you later.
Nice one, guys.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye now.